I have an announcement, Ryan said, tapping the side of his wine glass with the back of his fork. The conversation around my parents' packed dinner table softened, then stopped entirely, every head turning toward my husband of 8 years. I kept my face neutral, my breathing steady. My sister Chloe glanced at me once, too quickly, before shifting her gaze to her plate. I looked at Ryan, watching the subtle tremor in his hand, the way his eyes avoided mine and instead focused somewhere just above everyone's heads. His voice was calm, practiced, but I knew him too well. He was afraid. Haley and we're getting divorced, he said. My mother gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. My father's jaw clenched, and he leaned back in his chair like someone had just hit him. Ryan cleared his throat and continued. This isn't easy to say. I wasn't planning to do it this way, but with everyone here, maybe it's time. He paused, then reached across the table, past the bread basket, past the roast chicken, and took Chloe's hand in his. Chloe and I are in love. We didn't mean for it to happen. We tried to fight it, but sometimes love chooses you. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I've ever experienced. Even the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to have stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes turned to me, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. The tears, the screaming, maybe even a thrown wine glass or a dramatic exit. Instead, I reached for my phone and said calmly, "Could everyone check your email, please?" Ryan blinked. "What?" "I sent something out right before dinner," I said, unlocking my phone. "Everyone should have it by now." Confused glances rippled around the table as family members hesitantly reached for their phones. My cousin Natalie was the first to react. Her eyes widened as she read. Then my mother, whose face went pale as she scrolled. Then Uncle Mark, Aunt Lillian. One by one, expressions changed from confusion to shock to something darker. Chloe's hand slowly pulled away from Ryan's. She grabbed her phone with a sudden urgency. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice low and sharp. Ryan looked stunned. "Haley, what is this?" "I'm Haley Shaw," I said evenly. "I'm 34 years old. I work as a cybersecurity specialist for a digital threat analysis firm in San Francisco. I track data breaches, uncover fraud, and document digital behavior patterns for legal investigations." I looked around at the table. "I'm very, very good at my job." No one spoke. "What I wanted from this marriage," I continued, "was simple. A life built on trust, respect, and shared values. What I got was something else entirely." Chloe had stopped scrolling. Her hands were trembling now. "The betrayal wasn't just the affair," I said, my voice steady, unhurried. "It was the lies, the rewriting of history, the manipulation of everyone in this room, the assumption that I would play the role you needed me to play. The clueless wife, the shocked victim." Ryan was staring at his phone now, scrolling faster and faster, his face draining of color. "What is all this?" he muttered as if speaking to himself. How did you even—" "I documented everything," I replied. "Your messages, your meetings, your finances. I even have voice recordings thanks to the mic you never turned off in your office Zoom calls." A beat of stunned silence. "This is insane," Chloe said finally, her voice shrill. "You're insane." I tilted my head slightly. I'm just thorough. And what no one at that table knew, not yet, was that the emails they were reading only scratched the surface. The complete dossier was nearly 400 pages long, time-stamped, archived, and secured. And I wasn't done. Not yet. Ryan and I met at a charity fundraiser for wildfire relief 7 years ago. He was the charismatic trauma nurse who'd just come off a 16-hour shift, still in scrubs, charming the elderly donors with stories from the ER. I was there on behalf of my company, which had donated cybersecurity software to the state's emergency response network. We were polar opposites on paper. He was expressive, magnetic, emotionally intuitive. I was methodical, reserved, the one who preferred system logs and code to small talk. But somehow, it worked. Within a year, we were married. Our first apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up with paper-thin walls and a tiny balcony that overlooked a noisy street. We loved it. Ryan would cook elaborate pasta dishes while I worked late into the night on audits and incident reports. He'd leave me little notes. Take a break, genius. Pasta's better than code. He made life feel warm, grounded, safe. For years, I believed I was lucky. Chloe was always the one floating through life untethered. 2 years younger than me, she bounced from city to city, hobby to hobby. A semester of art school in New York, a yoga retreat in Costa Rica, a brief but dramatic marriage to a musician in Austin. When she showed up in San Francisco after her divorce, I opened our door without hesitation. She just needs a place to land, I told Ryan. It's family. He hesitated. She's a lot. Are you sure? She's my sister, I replied. She has nowhere else to go. That was 2.5 years ago. What was supposed to be a 2-month stay stretched to 6. Chloe moved into our guest room, got a part-time job at a photography studio, and started selling handmade candles on Etsy. She called herself a creative nomad. I called it chaos. Still, she brought energy into the house. Laughter, music, the occasional wine-fueled girls' night where she and I curled up on the couch watching terrible reality TV. Ryan and Chloe got along surprisingly well. They shared a love of spicy food and old horror movies. They'd gang up on me during board games, throw sarcastic banter back and forth in the kitchen. It was harmless, I thought. Even after she moved into her own place, Chloe remained a constant presence in our lives. Sunday dinners, impromptu beach days. She'd pop by to borrow our blender or ask Ryan for help fixing her sink. Sometimes I came home to find them mid-conversation, laughter spilling from the living room. I never questioned it, because Ryan was honest. He was good. He was mine. Looking back now, I can see it. The signs I brushed off. The way his phone never left his side. The shift in how Chloe hugged me. Briefer, guilty somehow. The coded glances. The tension that disappeared the second I walked into a room. But the truth didn't break through until 6 months ago. It was a Thursday. Ryan was working late and I had stayed home with a migraine. I needed to order takeout, but my phone was dead. His laptop was on the kitchen counter, open, the screen dark. I tapped the trackpad and the screen came to life. His email inbox was already open. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally, but it was there. A string of unread messages. One of them caught my eye. Subject line, last night. The preview read, "Still thinking about the way you touched me." My stomach flipped. I clicked. It was from Chloe. What followed was a thread of messages that stretched back months, dozens, maybe hundreds, photos, explicit language, sentiments like, "We have to be careful," and "She'll never suspect. She's too locked in her own head." I scrolled with robotic detachment, my pulse loud in my ears. Ryan had replied to one with, "She's been working late all week. We're good tonight. Come over at 9. That was 2 days ago. I recognized the date. I'd been in Palo Alto for a late meeting with a client. I even texted Ryan to say I was running late. He responded with, "Drive safe. I'll wait up." He hadn't waited up. I remember coming home to a dark, quiet apartment. His car was in the driveway, his clothes folded neatly on the chair. My husband, the man I had built a life with, was sleeping peacefully beside me just hours after being inside my sister. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw his laptop across the room like women do in movies. I closed the browser. I turned off the light. And I sat in silence until morning. The next day, I woke up early and went through the motions. Shower, coffee, bus to the office, smile at the receptionist, boot up my work machine. The routine kept me upright, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a woman betrayed. I was a woman trained to investigate betrayal. My entire job revolves around finding the cracks in digital armor, retracing digital footprints, analyzing behavior, identifying the subtle tells people leave behind when they lie. Ryan and Chloe had no idea who they were lying to. I didn't confront them, not then. Part of me still wanted to believe I had misunderstood something, that it was a joke, a game, a sick fantasy they had never acted on, but I knew better. I did what I do best. I started gathering evidence. The first thing I did was buy a new hard drive. I named the folder Case HRC, a private shorthand for Haley, Ryan, Chloe. I told myself it was for clarity, to keep the evidence organized, but really, I needed to separate what was happening to me from who I was. Because if I treated it like a case, I could keep myself from falling apart. At first, I only saved the emails. I exported them from Ryan's account and tagged them by date, sender, and subject. Then I created a timeline. When the messages began, when they escalated, when their tone shifted from flirtation to intimacy to something more sinister. I marked the first time Chloe wrote, "I love you." It was dated 8 months earlier, a Wednesday. I remember that day. I had been in Boston for a cybersecurity conference. She and Ryan had gone to a movie, or so they said. I'd even teased them over text for acting like teenagers. "Thanks for keeping him company," I wrote. Chloe replied, "Always. He's easy to love." The second layer of evidence came from location data. Ryan had never disabled tracking on his phone. He believed in transparency, or claimed to. I pulled up his Google Maps history and compared it to his work calendar. There were inconsistencies, dozens of them. He wasn't at the hospital the night he said he had an emergency overnight shift. He was at a hotel downtown. The same one Chloe posted a photo of on Instagram the next morning, captioned, "Brunch vibes with a view that matched the hotel's rooftop cafe." Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly verified each lie. Restaurant receipts hidden in email confirmations. Duplicate Lyft rides from our address to Chloe's. One particularly telling day showed Ryan checking into a boutique hotel at 3:17 p.m., while his work calendar listed pediatric trauma simulation training. There was no training that day. I called the hospital using a private number and asked to confirm the class schedule. It hadn't been held in 3 months. Every night, after Ryan fell asleep beside me, I stayed up an extra hour, backing up data, screenshotting texts, downloading voicemail files. Chloe had left herself logged into our shared iPad. Her text threads synced automatically. One message to Ryan read, "She's getting suspicious. Do you think she knows?" He'd replied, "She's clueless. Trust me. She lives in her head." I printed it and filed it under underestimation. Some nights, I couldn't sleep at all. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Ryan's breathing, wondering how someone could fake an entire life so convincingly. How his hand could find mine under the covers, how he could kiss me goodbye in the morning, make me tea when I had headaches, plan weekend hikes, all while building a second life with my sister. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a performance, a carefully rehearsed character he slipped into with practiced ease. I stopped trying to find a breaking point. I stopped waiting for one of them to crack. They weren't going to confess, so I'd make the truth undeniable. 3 weeks into my documentation, I hired a private investigator. His name was Martin Leach, mid-50s, ex-cop, methodical. I chose him because he had a reputation for working quiet, clean, and confidential. I brought him a flash drive. After 20 minutes of reviewing the contents, he looked at me and said, "You sure you need me?" "I want corroboration," I told him. "Third-party verification. Photos, hotel surveillance, time-stamped observations. You know how defense attorneys work." He nodded. "You're not just trying to catch them. You're building a narrative." I didn't correct him. Because he was right. This wasn't about rage. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclaiming the truth, something I'd spent my entire life valuing. In a world of misinformation and manipulated perception, truth is currency. And they had stolen mine. Martin began trailing Ryan's car, Chloe's apartment, the hotel. He delivered weekly summaries, photos of them arriving together, of Chloe slipping out the back exit in sunglasses, of Ryan paying the valet in cash. They were trying to be careful, but not careful enough. I started matching their meetups to my own absences, a conference in Chicago, a family lunch I missed because of a deadline, even a night I had food poisoning and stayed in the guest room. They hadn't just lied. They had planned around me. I created a visual timeline, color-coded, with threads linking dates to events, photos, emails, texts. I added a financial layer next. Ryan and I had joint accounts, but I noticed small, regular transfers to a separate savings account I didn't recognize. I traced it, an online bank under his name only, opened 8 months ago. He had been moving money out quietly, $300 here, $500 there. When I added it up, it totaled just over $17,000. A house fund, maybe. Their house. When I mentioned it to Martin, he raised his eyebrows. "That'll play well," he said. "Judges don't like secret accounts, neither do juries." I wasn't even thinking about court. Not yet. I was still thinking about the dinner table, about the way they'd make the announcement, the faux remorse, the hand-holding, the way Chloe would tilt her head and say, "We didn't mean to fall in love. They were preparing to tell a story." So I needed a better one. The first time I tried to confront Ryan, I didn't come in with screenshots or accusations. I came with a glass of wine and a casual question. It was late, almost midnight. He'd just gotten home from what he claimed was a post-op emergency. He looked tired, his scrubs wrinkled, his expression soft. He leaned against the porch railing while I handed him his drink. "I've been thinking about Chloe lately," I said, keeping my voice light. He turned toward me slowly. "Yeah?" "She seems close to you." He gave a small laugh. Too small. "She's your sister," he said. "Of course we're close." I nodded. "Right, but sometimes it feels like the two of you have secrets." Ryan tilted his head, feigning concern. "Haley, what are you saying?" His tone was calm, patient. It was the tone of someone preparing to flip the script, and I recognized it because I'd heard it before, from clients accused of insider fraud, phishing scams, network breaches, the guiltless tone of practiced deception. "I'm not saying anything," I said. "I'm just asking." "Well," he said after a pause, "I don't like what it sounds like." He turned the conversation skillfully, like a seasoned interrogator. "She's family, you're acting paranoid." "I'm acting observant." "She's been through a lot, Haley," he said, stepping closer. "And you've been distracted. All those hours at work. You've been distant. Maybe she's just filling a gap." There it was. The first shift in blame. I didn't flinch. "I didn't realize there was a gap," I replied. He looked at me with feigned sadness, then reached for my hand. "Maybe we should see someone," he offered. "A therapist. I think something's off between us." He was good. Not honest, but good. The next day, Chloe texted me out of the blue. "Want to get lunch? Sister Day?" Just us. I stared at the message for a long time. She had never been interested in sister days before. She preferred spontaneity, late-night wine, not midweek brunches and bonding. I met her anyway. We sat on a sunny patio in the Marina District. She wore oversized sunglasses and too much perfume. She talked about a gallery opening, a new boy she was dating, a possible trip to Bali. The lie tasted sweet on her tongue. She barely flinched. "I feel like you've been a little distant lately," she said, stabbing at her salad. "Just busy with work," I replied. Ryan had trained her well. By the time dessert arrived, she was laughing, teasing me about how intense I always was. "You know, you need to relax more," she said. "Even Ryan says so." She took a slow sip of her wine and smiled. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just participating. She was enjoying it. My second confrontation was less subtle. 2 weeks later, I left the hotel receipts and a printed email thread on the kitchen counter, face up. I knew Ryan would find them before I got home. When I walked in that evening, he was already waiting. He didn't yell. He didn't confess. He didn't even ask where I got them. "I don't know what this is," he said, holding up the papers, "but I think you need help." I blinked. "Help?" He nodded, eyes full of concern. "You've been so stressed. I think you're projecting something that isn't real." "You think I fabricated these emails?" "I think your work is getting to you," he said gently. "You see patterns everywhere. You think everyone's lying." The gaslight flickered bright. "That's rich," I said, setting my bag down. "Considering you've spent the past 2 years lying to my face." "I haven't done anything," he said calmly. "You're chasing ghosts." He folded the papers and slid them into a drawer. Then he walked over and kissed the top of my head like nothing had happened. I gave up on direct confrontation after that. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood what I was dealing with. Ryan and Chloe weren't just cheating, they were rewriting reality. Every denial, every lie, every carefully chosen word was designed not just to protect themselves, but to erase me, my experience, my perception, my truth. So I changed tactics. I made it easy. I left my laptop open to travel booking sites. I mentioned an old friend reaching out on social media. I let them believe I was distracted, preoccupied, slipping into my own world again. I played the part of the woman they had described in their messages. Too career-driven, too closed off, too wrapped up in her digital world to notice what was right in front of her. I let Chloe introduce me to a single guy at a gallery opening. "I told him you're too smart for your own good," she laughed, sipping her drink. "But worth the effort." Ryan smiled from across the room, watching us. I smiled back. The cruelty was impressive. Surgical, even. They weren't trying to hurt me with one moment of impact. They were trying to dismantle me piece by piece. But they didn't know I had already stopped playing the game. I wasn't trying to save my marriage. I was preparing for its autopsy. The last straw came from my mother. We were having lunch at her place. She was fussing with tea bags and asking about work. "Chloe said she's helping Ryan with something for your anniversary," she said absently. "She's being very secretive. I think it's a trip. Maybe Hawaii?" My stomach turned. Our anniversary was 4 months away. The idea that they were using that, the day that marked our vows, as cover for their affair was the final confirmation I didn't realize I was waiting for. They were getting bolder, sloppier, and I was done waiting. The invitation came via group text. "Mom, dinner at our house Sunday night for Dad's birthday. Everyone, please be on time. No drama, no drama." That was the part that made me laugh. Chloe replied first with 3 heart emojis and a "can't wait." Ryan responded a minute later. "We'll be there. Looking forward to it." I waited a few hours before I replied. Of course, wouldn't miss it. By then, everything was ready. Over the past 2 months, I had assembled the final pieces: recordings, financial records, confirmation from hotel staff, signed statements, timestamps, geolocation pings, even screenshots of Ryan's cloud backups where the two of them messaged each other about how to spin the story once they told my family. There was one conversation I reread often. It had taken place 3 weeks prior. "Do we tell them after dinner?" Chloe had written. "Before dessert," Ryan replied. "Otherwise, it'll ruin the cake. Haley can pretend to be shocked. She's good at that." That message was dated the same day I sat across from him, eating pasta he made, while he told me he loved me. Sunday came. I woke early, no nerves, no doubts. Just quiet resolve. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing dramatic, just clean, elegant. The one Ryan had always said made me look stable and dangerous. I took that as a compliment now. I curled my hair, put on a light touch of makeup, and fastened the pearl studs my grandmother left me in her will. She had lived through war, lost her husband young, and raised 4 children on her own. She didn't believe in revenge. She believed in justice. I arrived at my parents' house 5 minutes early. Ryan's car was already in the driveway. Inside, the mood was light, cheerful. My dad was showing off his new Bluetooth speaker. My mom fussed over the roast. Chloe hugged me like nothing had ever happened. "You look great," she said, stepping back to examine me. "New skincare routine?" "No," I said. "Just clarity." Dinner went on as planned. Small talk, family updates. Someone brought up politics, someone else deflected. Ryan poured the wine. Chloe passed the mashed potatoes. My mother beamed, proud of her full table. They thought they were in control. As dessert was being cleared, Ryan tapped his wine glass with the back of his spoon. That sound again. That soft, metallic chime I'd come to associate with lies. "I have an announcement," he said. The room quieted. I leaned back slightly in my chair and watched. "I wasn't sure when to say this," Ryan continued, "but I think it's time. Haley and I are separating." Gasps. A few confused looks. My aunt blinked rapidly. My cousin looked at me like I'd grown horns. "We've tried to make it work. he went on. But sometimes things change. Then came the shift, the reveal. Chloe reached across the table and took his hand. Chloe and I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, his voice soft, rehearsed. But sometimes love finds you, even when you're not looking. My mother covered her mouth. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. One of my cousins actually whispered, "No fucking way." I could feel their eyes turning to me, waiting for the breakdown, the shattered glass, the screaming. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed my dress, and reached into my bag. "I actually have something too," I said. Just a little context. I pulled out my laptop and set it on the table. Chloe's smile faltered. "I've sent each of you an email," I said, clicking send. "It should arrive in the next few seconds." Phones began buzzing, my dad's first, then my mom's. Then the chorus followed, alerts pinging one after another like dominoes falling. They began reading. The room changed. Ryan stared at his screen, his expression shifting in real time from confident to confused to something close to panic. Chloe's hand was still in his, but it had gone stiff. "What is this?" my mom whispered, scrolling through her phone. "I've compiled everything I've found over the last 6 months," I said calmly. "Photos, hotel bookings, financial transfers, text messages, cloud backups, audio recordings. I've redacted anything inappropriate, but feel free to ask for the full versions if you need clarification." Ryan looked up. "You went through my files?" "You left them open," I said. "Besides, I'm your wife, remember?" Chloe's voice came next, shaky, too high. "You had no right to—" "They're conversations about me," I cut in. About how to lie to me, about how to manipulate my family, about how to make yourselves look like victims. So yes, I had every right. My mother was crying now, quietly, hand pressed to her mouth. My dad hadn't moved. His phone was still in his hand, the screen lighting his face. He looked at Ryan. "You took money from me," he said flatly. Ryan blinked. "What?" "You asked me for help with your student loans," my dad said. "Meanwhile, you were transferring money into a private account to start a new life with my daughter's sister." "It's not what it looks like," Ryan stammered. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "I'm good with digital evidence, remember?" More family members were reading now. Gasps, murmurs, the occasional soft curse under someone's breath. Aunt Karen looked directly at Chloe. "How could you do this to your sister?" Chloe's face crumpled. "It just happened. We didn't plan it." "In your own words," I said. "You said, 'We'll tell them after dessert.' Haley will pretend to be surprised." Ryan tried one more time. "This is twisted," he said, his voice rising. "You've been spying on me. You built a whole case like I'm some kind of criminal." "No," I said. "I built a record because I knew you'd try to spin this." Then I turned to Chloe. "And I knew you'd cry." They didn't speak again. Not at that dinner. Not as the room turned on them. As uncles, aunts, cousins, and parents expressed their shock, their disgust, as years of love and trust dissolved in real time. No one raised their voice. There was no screaming. There didn't need to be. Truth, when presented without apology, doesn't need to shout. I gathered my bag, gave my father a soft squeeze on the shoulder, and walked toward the door. "I'm sorry this ruined your birthday," I told him. He stood and hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry we didn't see it," he said. I nodded. "They made sure you wouldn't." I filed for divorce the next morning. Ryan hadn't come home after the dinner. I assumed he was at Chloe's. I didn't care. My attorney, Evelyn Park, reviewed my files with an expression I'd seen only a handful of times, once on a federal judge's face when I'd handed over a forensic trace that unraveled a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. "This is clinical," Evelyn said, flipping through color-coded folders and digital backups. "You don't just have a case, Haley. You have a narrative." "I know," I said. She leaned back in her chair. "Do you want to go for full asset division, fault-based leverage, public testimony?" "No," I said. "I want clean lines, no contact, no false perception. And I want control of the narrative." Evelyn smiled slightly. "Not here for revenge?" "Not interested," I said. I just want truth to stand on its own. The days that followed were a blur of messages. My phone buzzed nonstop. Family, friends, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Support poured in. Some sent angry messages about Ryan. Others apologized for never seeing it. A few asked me how I'd stayed so calm. I didn't reply to most. Because calm didn't mean unaffected. It meant prepared. Ryan texted once, "Can we talk privately?" What you did wasn't fair. I didn't respond. Chloe sent a longer message full of emotional spins and spiritual jargon. This pain is part of our growth. Maybe someday you'll understand that love doesn't follow rules. I still love you. You're my sister. I deleted it without reading the rest. They didn't get to reframe this. The divorce took 10 weeks. Quick, clean. Evelyn negotiated a favorable settlement. The secret savings Ryan had hidden became part of the marital assets. Chloe's use of my credit card and fraudulently signed documents were noted. But I didn't press charges. I didn't need to punish them. Watching their carefully curated fantasy fall apart in front of the people they needed to believe it, that was enough. 3 months after the dinner, I moved into my new apartment overlooking the bay. It was small, minimalist, full of light, the kind of place no one had ever lived in but me. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time. I chose new dishes, new sheets, new passwords. I painted my walls myself and added security cameras, not because I felt unsafe, but because I liked knowing. Control, not out of fear, out of power. That evening, I stood at my kitchen counter with a glass of wine, watching the sun sink below the skyline. The laptop sat open beside me. On it, the final version of my documentation folder. All the photos, transcripts, recordings, financials. I hovered over the file for a long moment. Then I selected it all and deleted it. The screen flashed confirmation. Just like that, it was gone. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I had finished the story. The next morning, I got up at 6, brewed strong coffee, and opened a blank document. New project, new client, new case, new chapter. I wasn't the woman they had written into their story, the oblivious, overworked, emotionally closed-off wife. I wasn't the background character in their grand, twisted romance. I had rewritten the script. And I had done it without raising my voice, without begging for truth, without needing anyone's permission to reveal it. I hadn't exposed them out of vengeance. I had done it